So there's a narrative going around. The Bush funeral was yesterday. The President George H.W. Bush obviously was laid to rest, and there's this narrative going around that the funeral and the tributes to the grace and dignity of President George Bush was an inherent rebuke to Trump, who obviously is a roughneck and has this boorish style. But I think the true narrative is exactly the opposite of that. I think that the Bushes had a very graceful funeral in which they included President Trump. President Trump behaved very well. And in doing that, it isolated the only group of people in the country who cannot put their rage and bile away for even a single day, namely the media. I mean, the funeral was genuinely remarkable for what it wasn't. It was remarkable that it was not a partisan hate fest. We all still remember the John McCain funeral. We don't have to remember the John McCain funeral. It's still going on, I think. There's still guys standing in the John McCain funeral screaming at President Bush. You remember everybody was, Bush wasn't invited because Trump wasn't invited because McCain hated Trump, and the people who gave the speeches they gave were inherently attacking Trump and sometimes openly attacking Trump. It was just an ugly thing. And the funny thing about it was it reflected John McCain's personality. He was an angry man. He hated Trump, and he even forsook his main campaign promise of repealing Obamacare just to get back, I think, just to get back at Trump and to stick it to him. But Bush, the elder Bush, was a man of grace and decency, and he's raised his family to be like that. And so they reached out. No matter what you thought of the man's politics, he was just a graceful, elegant guy with a lot of goodwill for people. And the Bush family reached out to the White House and said, look, we want you very much to be included in this, and we want the funeral not to be about you and not to be about politics, but to be about this man who has passed away, this obviously a patriot who has passed away, and that's what we want to talk about. And so we were treated to what was a show of what you would either call grace and unity, or if you're a cynic, you would call it sentimentality and hypocrisy. And I think it's good to pause for a minute and figure out which it was. What is it when five presidents who clearly, some of whom don't like each other very much, what is it when they gather together and sit comfortably with each other and speak kindly with each other? What is it when Washington is so divided, stops for a moment and starts to talk about this man in good, glowing terms? What is it when you don't talk about a man's failures and flaws, but it's at a funeral you talk about the things that he did well? I am not a sentimental person. I am probably the opposite of a sentimental person. I have a real hard-boiled streak at bottom, and I don't like sentimentality because a lot of times it turns away from the truth of things, and it gets things exactly wrong. However, I approve of funerals like this. I approve of shows of unity, of speaking well of the dead on the day you bury them. I approve of people putting aside their differences for a moment and coming together around a grave or a coffin and being kind to each other and treating each other kindly. And the reason I believe in this is because of a little thing that I like to call death. Okay, death is a big deal. It is a big deal no matter what you believe in, no matter what you think comes after death, whether you believe in heaven or nothing or rebirth. This life does not repeat itself, and this life is an urgent, important, and beautiful and sacred and fragile thing, and it ends when it ends forever. This life ends forever. And that means all of us are in the same boat, all of us with our flaws, all of us with our problems. Death is bigger than our flaws. It's bigger than our political differences. It's bigger than our grudges. Look, the way you can tell it's bigger is because you don't die for those things. You don't die for your grudges. You die over big things, and death isn't bigger than freedom. It's not bigger than right and wrong, but it's bigger than these little things that are most of the things that we argue about, especially in this country where we're really not as far apart as we like to pretend we are. It's one day. Every other day, we measure each other by our failures. It's one day when we measure a man's life by its successes, which is probably the real measure of a person's life, because we all have so many failures. We all have so many things that we do wrong, so many thoughts we shouldn't have, so many actions we shouldn't have taken. We all have things that we regret, but not all of us achieve anything. Not all of us actually accomplish anything. Not all of us have the kindness that it takes to raise a family well. Not all of us are able to put aside our differences and act well with other people. Not all of us can use our talents to the full. Not all of us work hard enough to use the talents that God gave us to the full. And those people who have done those things, they deserve to be celebrated. And all of us, I think, except for those who are truly, truly evil, all of us in the moment of death deserve to be celebrated. And, you know, I've been to funerals. You've probably been to funerals. It works. It works. When you speak about a man in glowing terms, it makes all of us sort of look within and say, have I done enough? I mean, every time I'm at a funeral, I saw a cartoon once of two people walking out of a funeral, and one says to the other, you know, I should probably live a better life, you know. And that's true. You know, when you are listen to a man's life summarized in glowing terms, it causes you to look within and maybe try to be a little bit more patient and kind. Maybe try to work a little harder at what you're supposed to do, and speak to the people you don't like with a little bit of kindness. And the Bushes, in keeping with the family that George H.W. Bush raised, in keeping with the values of that family, they managed to organize just a couple of hours when Washington stood still, when people stopped screaming at each other, and when we talked about a man in glowing terms and forgot a little bit about the things he did wrong and forgot about a little bit about the things we disagreed with, and remembered that we are all of us living under this sword of Damocles called death, and it makes all of us a lot smaller than we think we are, and all of our problems a lot smaller than we think they are. The big moment at this funeral, and the one that is just, I think, really reached out and touched everyone, was when George W. Bush got up and saluted his father. I want to play the second cut of this. We don't have time to play them both, but play the second cut, which was just an amazing moment. And if you were watching it, it was even all the more amazing.
We're going to miss you. Your decency, sincerity, and kind soul will stay with us forever. So through our tears, let us know the blessings of knowing and loving you, a great and noble man, the best father a son or daughter could have. And in our grief, let us smile knowing that Dad is hugging Robin and holding Mom's hand again.
That's beautiful stuff. And to see the former, a guy who was once the most powerful man in the world, break down like that for his dad is a beautiful thing. You know, my sister, Caitlin Flanagan, who writes over at The Atlantic, wonderful writer, she tweeted that when your son says that about you, the best father you ever had, that's the victory of life. And that you should imagine that moment and live your life backwards to that, to make sure you earn that moment, because that is a beautiful thing. There was also some humor. My favorite came from the historian John Meacham, a terrific, terrific story that he told. This is, let's see, this is cut 4.
He never slowed down. On the primary campaign trail in New Hampshire once, he grabbed the hand of a department store mannequin asking for votes. When he realized his mistake, he said, "Never know, gotta ask." You can hear the voice, can't you? As Dana Carvey said, the key to a Bush 41 impersonation is Mr. Rogers trying to be John Wayne.
It was good stuff, especially good stuff because when he was alive, those kinds of gaffes, he was very gaffe prone. Apparently, in person, I never met him, but in person, he was very eloquent. But when he was on stage, he was not the best public speaker in the world, and was frequently making gaffes like that. And of course, our lovely press always ripped him to shreds. So listen, I think this was a beautiful thing and reminded us really of who we really are. I mean, this is the thing. This is the great thing about death. It reminds you of who you really are. It's the only good thing I think I've ever said about death, which I'm not a big friend of. But it does remind you that you're much smaller than you think, that you probably shouldn't judge others on their failures because you have so many of them yourself, and judge them by their successes, and then think about your own life and whether there are enough successes in it. And of course, by success, my sister was right. It's not the success measured by fame. It's not measured by money. It's measured by having the people who love you talk the way W spoke about his father there in that beautiful moment. So the idea was, of course, in the press that this is what we're doing as a nation. This is what we're coming together. Only one segment of society, besides the clowns who come out from under their rocks on Twitter, only one segment of society could not bring themselves to join in, and that was the media. I mean, it was just amazing. They could not stop. They could not stop talking about Donald Trump and comparing anything that anybody said good about George H.W. Bush to Donald Trump. One of my favorites came from MSNBC, and I try not to pick on MSNBC because they're an openly liberal thing, but this was just so interesting because he just couldn't help himself. This is Peter Baker at MSNBC.
It was, I think, a moment for Washington to pause and reflect on the way things have gone lately. You saw the president of the United States, President Trump, sitting there watching all of this, not given a role to speak, pretty unusual for an incumbent president. At times seemed to be a little defiant. He held his hands up, arms up like this, as if he wasn't quite happy with what he was hearing, but otherwise kept quiet, decided not to make any remarks to spoil the occasion. So, it was a coming together for Washington, I think.
So President Trump he's reading his mind, first of all. He's reading his body language, and he says he kept quiet and didn't make any remarks to spoil the occasion. But you know who didn't do that? You. It's the media that just couldn't do it. It could not leave him alone. And the other guy was John Avlon, who is at CNN, and he was a speechwriter. And here's the thing. There was, of course, you go to a funeral of a man, and they're going to talk about his good qualities, right, as we said. And they're going to talk about also the fact with this man that he was graceful and dignified and all this stuff. Now, you can look at that as a rebuke to President Trump, who's not graceful and not dignified. It's true. But you cannot do that, too. It's you who impose that. So John Avlon, you saw Peter Baker was reading the mind of Donald Trump. John Avlon was reading the minds of the speech makers, thinking that their tributes were obviously attacks on Trump.
The clips that we just played from Meacham and Mulrooney were not an accident. That was an implicit diss at the current president. And that's just, and it's because the contrast between the two men. And you make choices when you write speeches. And when you all of a sudden talk about all the leaders of the world understood they were dealing with a true gentleman, that's one thing this president has rarely been accused of. And I'll also say, I don't think you want to give out too many medals for not screwing up a presidential funeral. The president was on best behavior this week, but that's a fairly low bar.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. When you read somebody else's mind, you're usually reading your own mind. And so that's what you got from Avlon there. It's just this insult. We're not going to give him any medals for. Let me ask you this. If Trump doesn't get any medals for not being graceless, for being graceful at this funeral, what does John Avlon get for not being able to take the time of this funeral off for just a few minutes and put a sock in it, like just zip it up a little bit? So this was the stuff that really was disturbing. The fact that they couldn't stop talking about Trump, the fact that they saw everything as a rebuke to Trump, anything good that anybody said about President Bush. That was not the spirit of the place. It was really quite amazing. Even some of the commentators on the right, I thought, when Melania and Trump came in, they shook hands with all the other presidents and their wives, and Hillary Clinton was down at the end of the line, and she nodded at Melania. She didn't get up, and people thought that was a diss against Melania Trump. I actually didn't think so. I hate to let Hillary Clinton off the hook because she's spent her lifetime getting off the hook for many worse things. But I thought in this case, if I had been sitting there, I might also have nodded. She greeted her. That was all I want. My absolute favorite of all these people is Dan Rather. I mean, you have to think about this for just a second, but Dan Rather treated the Bushes like dirt. His career ended, basically, and his honor was lost trying to destroy George W. Bush over nothing. He was so desperate to destroy him, he was willing to use forged papers. He got caught by the internet, those evil people in pajamas, which is where PJ Media got its name. And this is what he did to the elder Bush. When George Bush I started running, he invited him on TV for what was supposed to be a candidate, one of those, it's a general thing about who this candidate is, a candidate profile. And instead, he sandbagged him with questions about the Iran-Contra scandal in the Reagan administration, something the press was absolutely obsessed with because it was the only glove they ever landed on Ronald Reagan. People loved Ronald Reagan. They didn't care about the scandal. They shouldn't have cared about the scandal. It wasn't even a scandal as far as I was concerned. But he sandbagged Bush with this scandal. And Bush came back at him for it. And what he's referring to here when he says there's 6 minutes or something like that, this was an incident that happened when at Miami, rather got angry that his newscast was being held up by a tennis match and he was a diva and he stormed off. And because the tennis match ended, CBS was caught with nothing to put on and there were 6 minutes of dead air. So rather, in this unprofessional moment, stormed off. And that's what Bush is referring to. But listen to this exchange. This was supposed to be a candidate profile and instead turned into this.
I don't want to be argumentative, Mr. Vice
You
President.
do, Dan.
No,
This is not a
no,
great
sir, I
night
don't.
because I want to talk about why I want to be president, why those 41% of the people are supporting me.
And, Mr.
I
Vice
don't think
President,
it's
these
fair to
questions are
judge a
designed-
whole career. It's not fair to judge my whole career by a rehash on Iran. How would you like it if I judged your career by those 7 minutes when you walked off the set in New York?
Well,
Now,
Mr.
would you like that?
Mr.
I have
Vice
respect
President,
for you, but I don't have respect for what you're doing here tonight.
Mr. Vice President, I think you'll agree that your qualifications for president and what kind of leadership you'd bring to the country, what kind of government you'd have, what kind of people you have around him is much more important than what you just referred to. I'd be happy to.
Well, I want to be judged on the whole record.
Well,
and you're not.
and I'm
giving me
trying
an
to set the record
opportunity.
straight,
You
Mr.
invited
Vice
me to
President.
come here to talk about, I thought, the whole record.
I want you to talk about the record. You sat in a meeting with George Shultz.
Yes,
He
and
got
I've given you an
apoplectic
answer.
when he found out that
He
you
didn't get
and the
apoplectic.
president were being
Ask
party of
John
sending
Regan.
missiles to the Ayatollah of Iran. Can you explain how you were supposed to be you're an anti-terrorist expert. Iran was officially a terrorist state. You went around telling.
Explain that, Dan. I wanted those.
Mr.
I
Vice
wanted
President,
Mr.
the question
Buckley
is,
out of there.
but
Before he
you've
was
made us
killed,
hypocrites
which he
in the
has
face of
been
the
killed.
world. How could you
That was bad.
sign on to such a policy?
Even Sam Donaldson, a left-wing haranguer of presidents, criticized this. And so after doing this, blowing his career trying to get W, embarrassing himself in this interview, Dan Rather tweets, "Watching today's eulogies, I thought about our national reckoning. We can't rely on the consciences of those who have shown no humility from those who refuse introspection. Forces of change must swell in the population at large to shake our republic into a more just future." How can a man be that unaware of who he is and where he stands in the culture? Let me just finish this. We got a great interview. I want you to hear this. It's an amazing interview. But before we talk about that, I just want to say that this funeral brought up who has brought us to the path that we're in, the path of hostility, of poor manners. Who created the world that put a man like Trump in office? It was the left. Trump is a reaction to the left. I've said that a million times, but it's true. You talk about family values. Who attacked family values, the kind of family values we saw on screen during this funeral? Who just told us that family wasn't important, that men were toxic, that it was okay to curse in public? Who degraded this culture until somebody with the poor manners of Trump not only could become president, but had to become president? What did they think? What did they think? They were going to poison every well of culture, and somehow that wasn't going to touch the halls of the government. It wasn't going to reach into the White House. Why did they think that they could turn us against each other, call us racist, sexist, all the things they call us? Why did they think that that was never going to come back and bite them? They are the people who have brought us to this pass. I admit that I wish we had a president of more grace. I've said that a million times, I know. But why is it that it takes a man like Trump to do the things that he's doing, which are basic, all-American, successful, conservative things? Why does it take a man like that to win? Because they have unleashed this culture of hate and division and nastiness and anti-patriotism. They're the ones. They are the source of this. And really, you could see it in Dan Rather. They do not look in the mirror. They may not even own a mirror, but they ought to start, because all of us are looking at them.